The night was cold and strange winds moved across the desert sky. Ethan Cole sat inside his small home on the edge of the alien marketplace. Fixing a broken lamp, he was used to quiet nights, only the sound of the wind and the creak of his old walls, but tonight was different. It started with a single knock on the door. Sharp and quick, then another, louder, like someone was desperate. Ethan stood slowly, wondering who would come at this hour. When he opened the door, the sight froze him in place. A young alien woman stood there, trembling. Her clothes were nothing more than torn fabric wrapped around her shoulders. Her skin was pale silver with faint glowing patterns, but those patterns were dim. Her eyes, large and filled with fear, kept glancing behind her as if someone was chasing her before Ethan could speak. A shadow moved from the darkness. A tall alien male stepped forward, his face twisted in disgust. "This is yours now, human." He spat in a voice filled with hatred. "She is nothing but a dirty heritage. She is filth." He shoved the woman forward, making her stumble. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away into the night. Disappearing into the storm, Ethan looked at the woman, confused. She was breathing hard, clutching a small bag to her chest, as if it was her only possession. "What's your name?" he asked softly. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she whispered, "Soraya." Her voice shaking, her accent was strange, like she was forcing human words through alien lips. Ethan stepped aside, letting her in. She hesitated, looking at him as if unsure she could trust him. Finally, she crossed the threshold, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Ethan closed the door, shutting out the cold. Inside, Soraya sat in the corner, her knees drawn close. She refused food at first, then accepted a cup of warm tea, but barely touched it. Her eyes kept moving to the door, to the window. It was as if she expected that alien man to return and drag her away. Ethan didn't ask too many questions. He could see she was exhausted. But he noticed something odd around her neck was a thin metal collar. It wasn't decorative. It looked like a tracking device or a mark of ownership. When he asked about it, she flinched and looked down, refusing to answer. Hours passed, and the storm outside grew louder. Soraya finally spoke again, her voice soft and distant. "He left me here," she said, "because no one else would take me." She didn't explain what dirty heritage meant. But Ethan could guess. In some alien cultures, mixed blood was seen as shameful. If she truly came from two rival alien races, it would make her unwanted in both. But why bring her to his door? Ethan had no history with her kind, no reason to be involved, and yet the look in her eyes made it impossible for him to turn her away that night. As she lay on a small cot in the corner, Ethan sat awake. Every creak of the wind, every sound outside made him check the door. Something told him that Soraya's arrival was not an accident, and that the man who left her here was not done with either of them. The storm howled outside, but inside the little home, the air was thick with unspoken questions. Who was she running from? Why did she seem both terrified and relieved to be here? And most of all, what kind of danger had just stepped into his life? Ethan didn't have the answers yet, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, it was only the beginning. Morning came slowly. The storm had left the streets wet and silent. Ethan stepped outside to see the pale sun breaking through the clouds inside. Soraya sat quietly near the small fire, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she barely drank. She looked like someone who had been running for years. Her shoulders carried a weight that was not just from the night before. Ethan had questions, but every time he tried to speak, she lowered her eyes. Finally, he decided to take her to the marketplace. Maybe fresh air and some food would help. Soraya followed him silently, keeping her head low. The moment they stepped into the crowded streets, he noticed it. The stares, the whispers, the way people stepped back as if she was carrying a deadly disease. Two alien merchants whispered to each other, their voices just loud enough for Ethan to hear. "That's the dirty heritage woman," one said with disgust. "She should have been left to die," the other replied coldly. Ethan's jaw tightened. But Soraya acted like she didn't hear. Her eyes stayed on the ground. And she kept walking. At a fruit stall, Ethan tried to buy her something to eat. The alien vendor looked at Soraya and refused to take his money. "We don't serve her kind," the vendor said sharply. Ethan's temper burned. "She's done nothing to you," he said. But the vendor only shrugged. "Her blood is wrong." They left without buying anything. Soraya's steps slowed, and her voice was barely a whisper. "This is why I can't stay anywhere for long," she said. "No one wants me. No one will help me." Ethan wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the truth was clear in every face they passed. As they turned a corner into a quieter alley, trouble found them. Two large alien thugs blocked their path, both with sharp blades in hand. "Well, look who it is," one said with a grin. "The worthless half-blood," the other added. They stepped toward Soraya, ignoring Ethan completely. Ethan moved in front of her. "She's with me," he said firmly. One thug laughed. "Then you're making her problems your problems." The first one lunged forward, and Ethan blocked the strike with his arm. Pain shot through him, but he grabbed a broken metal pipe from the ground and swung it hard. The fight was quick and brutal. Ethan was faster than they expected. One thug fell to the ground, groaning. The other backed away, cursing. "This isn't over, human." He spat before they both ran off. Ethan turned to Soraya, who was standing frozen. Her eyes were wide, her hands shaking, but instead of stepping back, she moved closer and clung to his arm. It was not just fear, it was trust, the kind that comes only when someone stands between you and danger. They walked home in silence. Soraya didn't let go of his arm the entire way. When they reached the door, Ethan finally asked, "Why do they hate you so much?" She hesitated, then said, "Because I am not pure." Her father was from one alien race, her mother from another. Two peoples who had been enemies for centuries when she was born. Both sides saw her as a shameful reminder of forbidden mixing. Ethan listened quietly. She spoke of being passed around, traded, ignored, until finally married to a man who only wanted her for political gain. When the truth of her bloodline came out, he decided she was worthless. He didn't just throw her out, he made sure she had nowhere to go. "And now," she said softly, "I think he wants me dead." Ethan stared at her, the firelight in the room casting long shadows. He didn't know why her husband had brought her to him specifically, but he knew one thing: if she stayed, more trouble would come. Yet, looking at her now, sitting on the floor with tired eyes, he couldn't imagine telling her to leave. That night, as Soraya lay on the cot again, Ethan kept watch by the window. The streets were quiet, but he knew the peace wouldn't last. Somewhere out there, the man who abandoned her was making his next move, and Ethan was starting to realize that protecting Soraya might mean risking far more than his own safety. The days after the alley fight were quiet on the surface, but Ethan could feel the air growing heavier. Soraya tried to keep herself busy, cleaning the small house, mending his old clothes, preparing simple meals. But every time she thought he wasn't looking, her eyes drifted toward the windows, scanning the streets. It was the look of someone who had learned to expect trouble. One night, Ethan was returning from the water well when he noticed movement in the distance. At first, it was just a flicker of shadow against the desert dunes. Then he saw it again, slow, deliberate steps following him at a distance. When he turned to face it, the figure vanished into the darkness, back at home. He found Soraya sitting by the fire. She looked up quickly, as if reading his expression. "They're watching us, aren't they?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't want to scare her, but he couldn't lie. "Yes," he said. and I think it's connected to your past. That night, Soraya finally spoke about the man who had abandoned her. Her husband was not just a merchant. He was one of the most powerful traders in the outer colonies. He dealt in rare metals, alien weapons, and political favors. She had been a prize for him, a symbol of victory over both her bloodlines. But when whispers spread about her heritage, his prize became an embarrassment in his world. Reputation was more valuable than gold, and so he had to erase the problem. I thought he would just leave me somewhere to die, she whispered, but instead, he brought me here. To you. Ethan frowned. Why me? Soraya shook her head. I don't know. But if he chose you, there's a reason, and it won't be good over the next few days. Ethan noticed small signs of danger. The market stall owners who once ignored him now avoided looking at him at all. A piece of paper slipped under his door with alien symbols for traitor burned into it. Even his usual water supplier doubled the price, claiming extra risk for dealing with him. It was as if Soraya's presence had turned him into an enemy of the town. One evening, while Soraya was washing dishes, Ethan saw something glint in the sand outside. He stepped out and picked it up. It was a small, flat disc. When he pressed it, a red light blinked once before going dark. It was a tracker. Someone had been marking his home. Inside, he showed it to Soraya. Her hands shook as she explained, My husband used these to track shipments. And people. Ethan set the disc on the table, his mind already turning to possible threats. If they knew where she was, it meant they were just waiting for the right moment. That night, Ethan stayed awake, watching from the window. The wind carried distant sounds, footsteps, low voices, and the faint hum of an engine somewhere beyond the dunes. Once, he thought he saw a tall figure in the shadows, but it melted away before he could be sure. The tension built like a coiled spring. Even Soraya's breathing changed. Her nights filled with restless tossing and murmured words in a language Ethan didn't understand. She woke one night, gasping, her eyes wide with fear. They will come soon, she said, not to take me back, but to end me. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then they'll have to go through me first, he replied. Her lips trembled, and for the first time since she arrived, she touched his hand without fear. It was a silent promise that whatever came next, they were no longer just strangers, but in the quiet moments before dawn. Ethan couldn't shake one thought. If her husband truly wanted her gone, he could have done it already. The fact that she was still alive meant he had a bigger plan. And Ethan feared that he himself might be the real target. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the scent of rain and danger. Somewhere beyond the horizon, shadows were gathering, and when they came, Ethan knew the real fight would begin. Not just for survival, but for the right to decide their own fate in a world that had already judged them. The air that morning felt heavy, even though the sun shone bright over the desert city. Ethan could not shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Soraya moved quietly around the house, her eyes drifting to the door every few minutes. It was as if she too could feel the same invisible weight pressing down on them. Ethan went out early to gather supplies, taking the long route through the market to avoid attention. But whispers followed him like shadows. Some aliens stopped talking the moment he passed. Others muttered insults under their breath. By the time he returned, the marketplace felt smaller, the streets narrower, and every stranger's stare sharper than before. When Ethan reached his home, he froze. The door was half open, swaying slightly in the wind. He had locked it when he left. His heart began to pound. Dropping the bag of supplies, he pushed the door open slowly. Inside, 3 armed aliens stood in the middle of his small living space. Soraya was backed against the wall, her hands raised, her body trembling, but her chin held high. The tallest alien stepped forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your hospitality is wasted, human," he said. "This woman belongs to her husband, and he's decided it's time to collect what is his." Ethan's grip tightened on the wooden staff leaning near the doorway. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said firmly. The second alien, smaller but with sharper eyes, sneered. "Her husband said you would say that." He took a step forward, his blade catching the light. "He also said to tell you he hasn't forgiven you for what happened years ago." Ethan's mind raced. Years ago? He had never met this man. At least, not that he remembered. The idea that there was some hidden history between them was unsettling. The third alien moved suddenly, trying to grab Soraya. Ethan stepped between them, swinging the staff hard. It caught the attacker in the ribs. Sending him stumbling back with a grunt, the tallest alien drew his own weapon. But Ethan didn't wait. He drove the staff into the alien's midsection, forcing him back toward the door. The fight was short, but vicious. The small room made it hard to move, and every strike was met with another. Soraya grabbed a clay pot from the shelf and smashed it over one alien's head. The loud crack of pottery echoed in the room, and the attacker fell to the floor, groaning. Finally, with two of them down and the third retreating toward the door, the leader spat on the floor. "This won't end here," he growled. "The husband will have her back soon, and you will wish you never opened your door to her." Then they were gone, disappearing into the street as quickly as they had come. Soraya stood frozen, her breathing quick and shallow. Ethan turned to her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her hands were still shaking. "They said your name," she whispered. "My husband knew you." Ethan frowned. "I don't know him," he said slowly, but deep inside, a memory flickered a brief moment from years ago when he had stopped a corrupt merchant from cheating a group of miners out of their pay. Could that merchant have been her husband? If so, then this was no random act of cruelty. This was revenge. Soraya sank into a chair, her eyes distant. "This isn't just about me," she said softly. "He wants you gone, and he's using me to do it." The realization settled like cold stone in Ethan's chest. Her arrival at his door had never been an accident. Her husband had known exactly what he was doing. Leaving her here was bait, and Ethan had taken it without knowing. Outside, the wind began to rise, dust swirling down the empty street. Ethan knew they had only two choices: wait for the next attack, or disappear before it came. But when he looked at Soraya, he knew running would only delay the fight. If her husband wanted to come for them, then maybe it was time to be ready for him. The house felt different after the attack. It was no longer just a place where Ethan lived. It had become a target. Every sound outside made him tense. Every shadow made Soraya draw closer to him. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both knew another attack was coming. Ethan decided they could not stay in the city. That night, he packed supplies, dried food, water canisters, blankets, and tools. They moved under the cover of darkness. Slipping through back alleys and silent streets, the desert wind bit at their faces as they left the city walls behind. Hours later, they reached a cliffside cave Ethan had discovered months ago while hunting for scrap metal. It was hidden from the main trade routes and overlooked a vast stretch of barren land. Here, they would be harder to find. Soraya stood at the entrance, looking at the endless horizon. "It's quiet here," she whispered. "I can breathe." The days that followed were slower, but not peaceful. Ethan set traps around the cave and checked them each morning. Soraya gathered herbs from the nearby slopes, cooking simple meals over a small fire. At first, they worked in silence, two strangers bound only by danger. But little by little, the silence began to break. One evening, as the fire crackled, Soraya spoke about her childhood. She told him how she used to hide in the roots of giant trees when her parents fought. How she learned to sleep lightly so she could run at the first sign of trouble. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he told her about green fields after rain, the smell of bread baking in his mother's kitchen. Soraya's eyes softened as she listened. as if those places were something she could almost see. Some nights, they laughed quietly over small things, Ethan burning a meal, Soraya trying to copy a human phrase and getting it wrong. Other nights, the air was heavier, the memory of the attack still close. They didn't speak of her husband much, but his shadow was always there. Soraya knew he would not give up. Ethan knew he would not let her face him alone. As days turned into weeks, their movements began to fall into rhythm. They cooked together, repaired tools together, and sat by the fire long after the food was gone. Sometimes Ethan would catch her looking at him. Not with fear, but with something else, something warmer. She had been given to him as a burden, but now she was becoming something far more than that. One night, a cold wind swept into the cave. They sat close to the fire, wrapped in blankets. Soraya looked at Ethan and said softly, "You didn't have to stay with me." "But you did." Ethan met her gaze. "I'm not leaving you," he replied. Her lips trembled for a moment before she smiled faintly. It was the first real smile he had seen from her. And it stayed with him long after the fire went out. Still, danger was never far. Tracks began to appear in the sand below the cliff. Once, Ethan spotted a flash of metal in the distance, too far to be sure, but close enough to make him tighten the traps. At night, the wind sometimes carried voices. Faint but real. Whoever was searching for them was patient, and patience was dangerous. On the seventh night in the cave, Ethan woke to find Soraya sitting by the entrance. She was holding a small knife, her eyes scanning the darkness. "I heard something," she whispered. Ethan moved beside her, the rifle in his hands. But after long minutes of silence, the noise faded. Still, they both knew it had not been there. Imagination, the bond between them, had grown stronger. But so had the threat. They were no longer just hiding. They were waiting. And when the next move came, they would face it together. Somewhere far away, her husband was planning. Somewhere. In the shadows. Armed men were waiting for the order to strike, and in the quiet of that cave, two people who were never meant to meet had already decided they would fight for each other, no matter what it cost. The morning began with silence. Too much silence. Even the wind that usually hissed through the cliffside caves seemed to be holding its breath. Ethan woke with a tight feeling in his chest. A sense that the long wait was over. Soraya was already awake, sitting near the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She didn't speak, but her eyes told him she felt it too. The air was heavier than usual, like the world was bracing for something. By midday, Ethan saw it, a shimmer on the horizon, dust rising in perfect lines. It wasn't the random scatter of traders or hunters. It was a formation, controlled, deliberate. He grabbed the old scope from his pack and lifted it to his eye. The sight made his jaw tighten. A large alien craft was moving slowly toward the cliffs, its metal hull reflecting the sun. Behind it, smaller hoverbikes fanned out, like hunting dogs. And at the front of it all was a tall figure in flowing silver arms, Soraya's husband. Soraya stepped beside him, her breath catching when she saw the shape of the ship. "He's here," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ethan lowered the scope. "Then it's time we end this," he said. They had no illusions about running. The craft was too fast, the desert too open. This fight was coming whether they wanted it or not. Within minutes, the ground near the cave shook under the weight of the landing. Sand swirled in violent circles as the ship's engines roared. The ramp lowered, and out stepped her husband, tall, sharp-eyed, and wearing a smirk that made Ethan's blood burn. "Well," the alien said in a deep, mocking voice, "the human who thinks he can keep what is mine." Ethan stood firm. "She's not yours," he replied. The alien laughed. "Everything I touch is mine. And she was given to me. Do you think I'll let a filthy human take her?" Behind him, 6 armed guards spread out, weapons ready. The desert wind whipped between them, carrying the tension like a blade. Soraya's husband stepped closer. his voice low but deadly. "You could walk away now, human, and I'll let you. Live, give her to me, and I'll even pay you." Ethan's answer was immediate. No. The alien's smirk faded into cold rage. "So be it," he said, raising his hand. The guards moved in, blasters humming to life. The first shot cracked the air, but Ethan was already moving. He ducked behind a boulder, returning fire with quick, sharp bursts. Soraya grabbed the rifle he had given her days ago, pressing herself against the cave wall. The battle turned the quiet cliffside into chaos blaster fire. Shouts, the crash of rock breaking under the force of energy bolts. 2 guards rushed Ethan, but he met them with the butt of his rifle, knocking one down and kicking the other away. Soraya's aim was steady, despite the fear in her eyes. 2 shots, 2 enemies down. Her husband saw it and snarled, "You dare raise a weapon against me." The fight dragged on, each side losing ground and gaining it back. Finally, her husband charged forward, blade in hand. Ethan met him halfway, the two clashing with a force that echoed against the cliffs. The alien was stronger, but Ethan was faster. Using the terrain to his advantage, they traded blows, each one more desperate than the last. Then it happened. The alien swung wide, overextending for a killing strike. Ethan stepped in close, shoving his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him stumbling. Before he could recover, Soraya was there, moving like a shadow. She swung the butt of her rifle hard against his head, dropping him to his knees. "You don't own me," she said, her voice trembling but filled with strength. One final strike, and he was on the ground, motionless. The surviving guards saw it and fled, dragging their wounded back toward the ship. Within minutes, the engines roared again, and the craft lifted into the sky, disappearing over the horizon. The cliffside was quiet once more. Except for their heavy breathing, Ethan looked at Soraya. She was shaking, not from fear, but from the release of years of pain. It was over, at least for now. The battle was over, but the echo of it still lingered in the air. The wind carried the smell of scorched sand and broken metal. Ethan leaned against a rock, catching his breath, while Soraya stood silently, staring at the horizon where her husband's ship had vanished for the first time since she had arrived at his door. There was no fear in her eyes. Instead, there was a strange calm, as if a heavy chain had been cut from around her heart. She walked slowly toward Ethan, her steps uncertain. "You didn't just protect me," she said softly. "You stood between me and the life I never wanted to return to." Ethan gave a faint smile. "I told you, I'm not leaving you." Her eyes shone, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The desert stretched endlessly around them, but here in this small space, it felt like the whole universe had narrowed. To just the two of them, they returned to the cave as the sun dipped low, the sky glowing in shades of gold and deep crimson. Inside, the fire's warmth filled the small space, chasing away the cold night air. Soraya moved closer to Ethan, sitting beside him in silence. It was not the silence of fear anymore, it was the quiet of two people who no longer needed words to understand each other. Over the next days, life began to feel different. They cooked together, shared stories without hesitation, and laughed more often. The walls between them had fallen, replaced with something unspoken but strong. Sometimes Ethan would find her humming softly while preparing food. Other times she would look at him with a smile that stayed even after she looked away. One night, a cold wind swept into the cave, stronger than usual. Ethan added more wood to the fire, but the chill still crept in. Soraya pulled her blanket tighter, then hesitated, glancing at him. "You're cold too," she said quietly, almost as if it was an excuse to close the distance between them. Ethan chuckled. "I've been in worse," but she shook her head and moved closer. Sharing her blanket with him, it was a simple act. Yet it felt like a line had been crossed, one they both had been waiting for. They sat close, their shoulders touching, and for the first time in a long while. Soraya rested her head against someone without fear. The firelight danced across her silver-marked skin, highlighting every faint glow that had returned since she left her husband's shadow. Ethan noticed how much stronger she looked, now not just in body, but in spirit. "You've changed," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just finally free to be myself." That night, when they lay down to sleep, the small cot in the corner felt too far apart. Soraya looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "I don't want to sleep alone anymore," she whispered. Ethan searched her face, seeing no fear there, only trust, without a word. He shifted over, making space beside him. She lay down, the warmth of her presence chasing away the cold. For a while, neither spoke, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft hum of the wind outside. Then Soraya said, "When he brought me to your door, I thought it was another form of punishment. But it was the start of something else." Ethan's hand found hers in the dark, and she squeezed it gently. "No more running," he said. "Not from him, not from the past. No more running," she agreed, from then on. The cave was no longer just a hiding place, it was their home. They worked side by side, planned their future, and built something the universe had tried to deny them. The past still existed, but it no longer controlled them. And at night, when the cold winds came, they no longer slept apart. Now they shared the same bed, not because of need or fear, but because somewhere between the danger, the fights, and the long nights in the desert, they had found something worth holding onto each other.